Sarah Martinez stepped off the bus at Fort Benning with her duffel bag slung over her shoulder, the Georgia heat hitting her like a wall. At 22, she had joined the Army to prove something to herself and escape the suffocating small town where everyone knew her business. What they didn't know was the collection of strange scars that decorated her arms and back, carefully hidden beneath long sleeves even in summer. The drill sergeant's voice boomed across the training ground as dozens of recruits scrambled to form lines. Sarah kept her head down, following the crowd toward the barracks where they would spend the next several weeks transforming from civilians into soldiers. She had practiced this moment in her mind countless times, rehearsing how she would blend in, how she would keep her secrets buried. The first few days passed in a blur of shouted commands, endless push-ups, and equipment inspections. Sarah excelled at the physical challenges, her lean frame surprisingly strong from years of working construction jobs back home. She kept to herself during meals, answering questions with short responses when other recruits tried to make conversation. It was during the third week, in the communal showers after a particularly grueling obstacle course, that her carefully constructed walls came crashing down. Sarah had waited until most of the other women had finished, timing her shower for when she thought she'd have privacy. But Private Jessica Chen had forgotten her soap and came back just as Sarah was reaching for her towel. The gasp that escaped Chen's lips might as well have been a gunshot in the quiet bathroom. Sarah froze, her back exposed, revealing the intricate pattern of thin, precise scars that crisscrossed her skin like a road map of pain. Some were straight lines, others curved in deliberate patterns. They weren't self-inflicted cuts or accident scars. They were something else entirely, something methodical and purposeful. Within hours, word had spread through the female barracks like wildfire. Sarah could feel the stares during dinner, hear the whispered conversations that stopped when she approached. She tried to eat her mashed potatoes and ignore the burning sensation of dozens of eyes examining her from across the mess hall. Private Rodriguez was the first to voice what everyone was thinking. She approached Sarah's table with a group of followers, her voice loud enough for half the dining hall to hear. "So what's the deal with the freak show tattoos, Martinez? You some kind of cutter or something?" Sarah's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. She set it down carefully, her hands trembling slightly. "They're not tattoos," she said quietly, hoping to end the conversation before it gained momentum. But Rodriguez wasn't finished. She leaned closer, her voice dripping with mock concern. "Oh, so you did cut yourself. That's even worse. How'd you even get through the psychological evaluation? Don't they screen out the crazy ones?" A few recruits laughed nervously. Sarah felt heat rising in her cheeks, but she forced herself to remain calm. She had endured worse than high school bullying tactics, though these women had no way of knowing that. "I'm not crazy," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil churning in her stomach. The harassment escalated over the following days. Someone had taken a photo of Sarah's back during another shower incident and passed it around on their phones during free time. The images showed the complex pattern of scars more clearly, revealing details that made the whispers grow louder. The marks weren't random. They formed symbols, letters, numbers. They told a story that none of the recruits could decipher, but their organized nature made them even more unsettling. Drill Sergeant Morrison noticed the tension building in the unit, but initially dismissed it as normal growing pains. Every group of recruits had their conflicts, their pecking orders to establish. But when Sarah's performance began to suffer, when she started missing shots on the rifle range and stumbling through drills she had previously mastered, he knew something was seriously wrong. The breaking point came during a field exercise in the fourth week. The recruits were practicing night navigation when Rodriguez decided to escalate her campaign of psychological warfare. She cornered Sarah near the supply tent, her voice a harsh whisper in the darkness. "I looked up those symbols online," Rodriguez hissed. "Found some pretty interesting stuff about ritual scarification. What kind of sick cult were you in, Martinez? Did they sacrifice animals? Kids? Sarah's composure finally shattered. Years of buried trauma, weeks of building pressure, and the constant stress of boot camp combined into a perfect storm. She spun around to face Rodriguez, her eyes blazing with a fury that made the other woman take a step back. "You have no idea what you're talking about," Sarah said, her voice low and dangerous. "Those marks aren't from any cult. They're from something much worse." Rodriguez recovered quickly, sensing weakness. "Oh yeah? Like what? Some gang initiation? Prison time? What's your big dark secret, freak?" Other recruits had gathered around, drawn by the confrontation. Sarah could see their faces in the dim light from the tent, a mixture of curiosity and disgust. She realized that no matter what she said, they would never understand. They had lived their entire lives in safety, never knowing the kind of evil that existed in the shadows of the world. "Forget it," Sarah muttered, turning to walk away. But Rodriguez grabbed her arm, spinning her back around. "No way. You don't get to act all mysterious and damaged. We're going to be soldiers together." "We have a right to know if you're some kind of liability." Sarah jerked her arm free, the motion causing her sleeve to ride up and reveal more of the scarring on her forearm. In the flashlight beam, the marks were clearly visible as deliberate cuts, forming what looked like letters or symbols in a language none of them recognized. "Jesus Christ," whispered Private Thompson. "What did they do to you?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Sarah looked around at the circle of faces, seeing fear mixed with the morbid curiosity. She realized that her silence was only making things worse, feeding their imagination with possibilities that might be more disturbing than the truth. But the truth was something she had sworn never to speak. The truth was classified at levels these recruits couldn't even imagine. The truth was a 3-month nightmare in a facility that didn't exist, at the hands of people whose names had been erased from all records. "Nothing," she said finally. "Nothing that concerns any of you." She pushed through the circle of recruits and walked back toward the barracks, leaving behind a group of confused and frightened young women who would spend the rest of the night speculating about what kind of horror could have created such methodical scarring. As Sarah lay in her bunk that night, listening to the whispered conversations around her, she wondered if joining the army had been a mistake. She had hoped for a fresh start, a chance to serve her country and find purpose in her life. Instead, she had walked into another situation where her past refused to stay buried. The scarring was just the visible reminder of an experience that had changed her on a fundamental level. 3 months of psychological and physical torture designed to break enemy agents had left marks that went far deeper than skin. The men who had held her had been professionals, experts in extracting information through methods that left no permanent damage except for the deliberate scarification that marked their victims as graduates of their program. Sarah had never broken. She had endured everything they threw at her and emerged with her sanity intact, though forever changed. The scars were meant to be a badge of honor among the intelligence community, proof that she had survived the worst kind of interrogation and kept her secrets. But to these civilian recruits, they were just evidence of something twisted and wrong. Tomorrow would bring more training, more opportunities for Rodriguez and her followers to make Sarah's life miserable. But as she drifted off to sleep, Sarah reminded herself of something her handler had told her during those dark months. Pain is temporary, honor is eternal. She had survived much worse than boot camp bullying. She would survive this too. The next morning brought an unexpected development that would change everything. Colonel Patricia Hawkins arrived at Fort Benning in an unmarked sedan, her silver hair pulled back in a regulation bun, and her uniform bearing insignia that made even the drill sergeants snap to attention. She wasn't supposed to be there. Her visit wasn't on any official schedule, and her presence immediately sent ripples through the command structure. Sarah was in the middle of weapons cleaning when Drill Sergeant Morrison approached her station. his usual stern expression replaced by something closer to confusion. "Martinez, report to the company commander's office immediately," he barked. But there was an uncertainty in his voice that hadn't been there before. The walk across the base felt endless. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. Had someone reported the shower incident? Was she being discharged for the psychological distress she was causing in her unit? She had worked too hard to get here to lose everything over scars that told a story she couldn't share. Captain Willis was waiting in his office along with the unexpected visitor. Colonel Hawkins stood near the window, her back to the door, studying something in a manila folder. When Sarah entered and saluted, the colonel turned around, and Sarah felt her blood turn to ice. She knew that face, not personally, but from briefings and classified documents she had seen during her time in captivity. Colonel Patricia Hawkins was a legend in the intelligence community, a woman who had spent decades in the shadows, running operations that officially never happened. Her presence here could only mean one thing. Someone had connected Sarah's scars to their true origin. "At ease, Private Martinez," Colonel Hawkins said, her voice carrying an authority that made the captain seem like a child playing dress-up. "Captain Willis, I need the room." Willis hesitated for a moment, clearly uncomfortable with being dismissed from his own office, but one look at the colonel's rank convinced him to comply. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving Sarah alone with a woman who knew secrets that could reshape governments. "Sit down," Hawkins said, gesturing to the chair across from the captain's desk. She opened the manila folder and spread several photographs across the surface. Sarah's stomach dropped as she recognized images of her own scarring, taken with high-resolution cameras that captured every detail of the markings on her skin. "These photos were taken yesterday by Private Chen," Hawkins continued, her tone professionally neutral. "She sent them to her brother, a computer science student at MIT, asking if he could help identify the symbols. Smart girl. Her brother immediately recognized them as cipher markings and forwarded them to a professor who specializes in cryptographic analysis." Sarah remained silent, but her hands clenched into fists in her lap. The security breach was catastrophic. Images of classified scarification were now circulating through academic channels, potentially exposing an entire intelligence program. "The professor, Dr. Elizabeth Warren at MIT, happens to be a consultant for the NSA," Hawkins continued. "She recognized the markings immediately and contacted her handler within 6 hours of receiving the photos. By this morning, those images were sitting on my desk with a priority flag that made my coffee cup shake." The colonel leaned forward, her gray eyes studying Sarah with the intensity of someone who had spent a career reading people's secrets. "The scarification pattern on your body matches the marking system used in Operation Nightshade, a Black Ops interrogation and resistance program that was officially terminated 18 months ago. According to all records, that program had 0 survivors." Sarah finally found her voice. "Ma'am, I don't know what you're talking about." Hawkins smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Private Martinez, I helped design Operation Nightshade. I know every detail of that program, including the scarification protocols used to mark subjects who completed the full course. What I don't know is how you survived something that killed 12 other test subjects." The room fell silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. Sarah stared at the photographs spread across the desk, seeing her own pain documented in clinical detail. Each mark told a story of endurance, of days when she thought death would be a mercy, of nights when she whispered prayers to a God she wasn't sure was listening. "The official story is that the program was shut down due to ethical concerns," Hawkins continued. "The truth is that we lost operational security when one of our subjects escaped and tried to expose the program to a journalist. We had to eliminate all evidence, all participants, all records. Every subject was supposed to be terminated." Sarah's hands began to tremble slightly. She remembered the night of the evacuation, the chaos as armed men swept through the facility, the sound of gunfire echoing through corridors she had walked for months. She had been scheduled for termination that morning, but had been moved to a different wing for additional testing. When the cleanup crew arrived, her cell was empty. "I was never a subject in any program," Sarah said carefully. "I enlisted in the Army through normal channels. I completed all required background checks and psychological evaluations." Hawkins reached into the folder and pulled out another document. "Sarah Martinez, age 22, born in Riverside, California. Mother deceased, father unknown. No siblings, no close relatives. Perfect recruitment profile for someone who wouldn't be missed." She looked up from the file. "Except that Sarah Martinez died in a car accident 3 years ago in Nevada." The blood drained from Sarah's face. Her carefully constructed identity was unraveling in real time. The paperwork that had gotten her into the Army, the Social Security number, the birth certificate, all of it was fabricated by handlers who had needed to give her a new life after she had escaped the impossible. "The woman sitting in front of me has Sarah Martinez's identity, but she's not Sarah Martinez," Hawkins continued relentlessly. "She's Subject 17 from Operation Nightshade, the only person to survive the full conditioning protocol and live to tell about it. The question is, why didn't you die with the others?" The interrogation continued for the next hour, with Hawkins systematically dismantling every aspect of Sarah's cover story. She knew details about the facility that only someone who had been there could know. She described the layout of the cells, the names of the handlers, the specific torture techniques used to break down psychological resistance. Finally, Sarah realized that continued denial was pointless. Colonel Hawkins clearly had access to information that proved her identity beyond any doubt. The only question was whether this was an execution or a recruitment. "You want to know why I survived?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because I was stronger than they expected. Because when they tried to break me, I bent instead of shattering. Because I learned to hide my real self so deep that even I forgot where I put it sometimes." Hawkins nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something she had already suspected. The scarification wasn't punishment, was it? It was a reward, a mark of graduation for subjects who completed the full program without breaking. "It was supposed to be an honor," Sarah said bitterly, "proof that I could endure anything. That I was ready for deep cover operations behind enemy lines. Instead, it became a target on my back that I'll carry for the rest of my life." The colonel closed the folder and leaned back in her chair. "The program may be officially terminated, but the assets it created are still valuable. You represent a significant investment in time, resources, and expertise. The question now is what to do with you." Sarah felt a familiar chill run down her spine. She had heard similar words before, usually followed by orders that led to missions no one was supposed to survive. "Are you here to finish what the cleanup crew started?" "That depends," Hawkins replied. "Are you still loyal to your country, or has your experience turned you against the people who created you?" The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Sarah understood that her answer would determine whether she walked out of this office alive or disappeared into another black site facility that didn't officially exist. Outside the office window, she could see her fellow recruits running formation drills in the afternoon heat. They were young, naive, and innocent in ways she would never be again. They worried about failing inspections and embarrassing themselves in front of their peers. She worried about survival and the possibility that her past would catch up to her no matter how far she ran. "I joined the Army to serve," Sarah said finally. "Not because I had to, but because I chose to. That hasn't changed." Hawkins studied her for a long moment, then picked up a secure phone from the desk. "This is Hawkins. Yes, I've confirmed the identity. Subject 17 is alive and operational. Request immediate consultation on asset reactivation protocols." As the colonel spoke in coded language that Sarah recognized from her previous life, she realized that her attempt to disappear into military anonymity was over. Whatever came next would be far more dangerous than boot camp harassment or drill sergeant intimidation. The marks on her skin had betrayed her once again, revealing secrets that were supposed to stay buried. But perhaps this time, instead of being a victim of her past, she could find a way to use it as a weapon against the enemies who had created her. 2 weeks after Colonel Hawkins' visit, Sarah found herself standing in formation with the rest of her training company, watching as a convoy of black SUVs rolled onto the base. The graduation ceremony was supposed to be a routine affair, with family members and local dignitaries attending to celebrate the newest soldiers joining the ranks. But the arrival of heavily armed security details and communications jamming equipment suggested this would be anything but routine. General Michael Harrison stepped out of the lead vehicle, his 4-star rank and chest full of ribbons, making even the base commander look nervous. Sarah recognized him immediately from classified briefings she had attended in her previous life. Harrison was the architect of America's most sensitive counterterrorism operations, a man who existed in the spaces between official policy and necessary action. The ceremony proceeded normally for the first hour. Families cheered as their children received their certificates and took their oath as soldiers. Sarah stood at attention in the back row, having no family to invite and preferring to remain invisible. But as General Harrison began his speech about service and sacrifice, his eyes found hers across the parade ground. For a moment that felt like eternity, their gazes locked. Sarah saw recognition flicker across the general's face, followed by something that looked almost like relief. He paused in his speech, just for a heartbeat, but long enough for Sarah to know that her anonymity was completely shattered. Today, you join an organization that traces its heritage back to the Continental Army, Harrison continued, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd. You will serve alongside heroes whose names will never be known, whose sacrifices will never be acknowledged, whose courage exists in the shadows where freedom is truly defended. The words seemed directed at her specifically. Sarah felt the weight of dozens of eyes from the security detail, men and women who had clearly been briefed on her presence. She was no longer a recruit trying to blend in. She was an asset under observation, a valuable commodity whose loyalty and stability were being evaluated in real time. After the ceremony, as families dispersed and new soldiers prepared for their first assignments, Sarah was approached by a young lieutenant she didn't recognize. Private Martinez, you're requested in the VIP tent for a brief meeting with General Harrison. The walk across the base felt like a death march. Sarah had hoped that Colonel Hawkins's investigation would result in reassignment or discharge, allowing her to disappear once again. Instead, it seemed to have triggered interest from the highest levels of military intelligence. Whatever came next would determine the rest of her life. The VIP tent had been cleared of everyone except essential personnel. General Harrison stood near a tactical map table, his uniform jacket removed and his sleeves rolled up, looking more like a field commander than a Pentagon bureaucrat. When Sarah entered and saluted, he gestured for her to stand at ease. I've been reading your file for the past 2 weeks, Harrison said without preamble. The real one, not the cover story you used to enlist. It makes for fascinating reading. Sarah remained silent, waiting for the other shoe to drop. In her experience, conversations with 4-star generals rarely ended well for people with her background. Operation Nightshade was my idea, Harrison continued, moving closer to study her face. I convinced the intelligence community that we needed soldiers who could endure capture and interrogation without breaking. The theory was sound. The execution was flawed. He stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could see the network of scars around his eyes, evidence of his own time in hostile territory. 12 test subjects died during the conditioning process. The program was terminated when ethical concerns were raised about human experimentation. all evidence was supposed to be destroyed. Sarah found her voice. "Sir, I was never part of any official program." Harrison smiled grimly. "Private? I know exactly what you were part of because I authorized your recruitment. 17-year-old runaway, no family, no connections. Perfect candidate for deep conditioning. You were selected specifically because your disappearance wouldn't trigger any investigations." The general walked back to the map table and picked up a manila folder. "What I don't understand is how you survived the termination protocol. According to all reports, Subject 17 died along with the other test subjects when the facility was sanitized." Sarah felt her carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. The memories she had worked so hard to suppress were flooding back. The sound of gunfire in the corridors, the smell of smoke as documents were burned, the chaos as handlers tried to execute contingency plans that had never been properly tested. "I wasn't in my cell that night," she said quietly. "They had moved me to the medical wing for additional scarification. When the cleanup team arrived, they checked my cell and marked me as terminated without verifying the body count." Harrison nodded as if this confirmed something he had suspected. "Bureaucratic incompetence saved your life. The handler responsible for the medical wing evacuation was killed before he could report that you were missing. By the time anyone realized the error, you had disappeared into the general population." The general opened the folder and spread several documents across the table. Sarah could see psychiatric evaluations, medical reports, and detailed assessments of her psychological conditioning. The paperwork painted a picture of a young woman who had been systematically broken down and rebuilt according to specific parameters. "The scarification wasn't just marking," Harrison continued. "Each symbol represents a specific conditioning trigger, a psychological pathway that can be activated under the right circumstances. You are, quite literally, a human weapon that we spent 3 years and $30 million creating." Sarah stared at the documents, seeing her own transformation laid out in clinical detail. The scars on her skin weren't just reminders of torture endured. They were access keys to programming that had been embedded in her subconscious, making her capable of things that normal soldiers couldn't do. "The question now," Harrison said, closing the folder, "is whether that weapon is still functional and whether it can be trusted to serve American interests." The implication was clear. Sarah was being evaluated for reactivation, brought back into the intelligence community that had created her. The alternative was permanent silence, ensuring that she could never expose the illegal human experimentation that had produced her. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Sarah said. Harrison activated a security device that would prevent their conversation from being recorded or intercepted. 3 months ago, we lost contact with a deep cover operative in Eastern Europe. Intelligence suggests he was captured and is being held in a facility similar to the one where you were conditioned. Traditional rescue operations are impossible due to political considerations." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as she understood the implication. "You want to send me back into that kind of environment? You're the only person alive who has survived that level of interrogation and psychological warfare," Harrison replied. "Your conditioning makes you uniquely qualified to infiltrate the facility and extract our operative. The mission would be completely unofficial, with full deniability if you're captured." The general moved to the tent entrance and gestured toward the base beyond. "Alternatively, you can complete your enlistment as a regular soldier, serve your country in a conventional capacity, keep your secrets, live a quiet life. But you and I both know that's not really an option anymore." Sarah understood the unspoken threat. Too many people now knew about her background for her to simply disappear into military anonymity. Her scarification had marked her as clearly as a flashing neon sign, making her a security risk that would require constant monitoring. "If I accept this mission," she said carefully, What guarantees do I have that it won't end the same way as Operation Nightshade? Harrison's expression softened slightly, the first sign of humanity she had seen from him. You have my personal guarantee that if you survive this mission, you'll be given a legitimate choice about your future. New identity, clean records, whatever life you want to build for yourself. The general extended his hand toward her. Or you can stay here and spend the rest of your enlistment wondering when someone else will recognize those marks and ask uncomfortable questions. Sarah looked at the offered handshake, knowing that accepting it would mean stepping back into a world she had tried desperately to escape. But the alternative was living in constant fear of discovery, always looking over her shoulder for the next Colonel Hawkins or General Harrison to appear. The scars on her skin tingled slightly, as if the conditioning embedded in them was responding to the possibility of reactivation. She had been created to be a weapon against America's enemies. Perhaps it was time to accept that destiny rather than continue fighting against it. "What's the timeline for this mission?" she asked. Harrison smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Immediate. You leave tonight." As Sarah reached out to shake the general's hand, she caught sight of her reflection in the tense metal frame. The young woman looking back at her was no longer the frightened recruit who had been mocked for her scars. She was something more dangerous, something that had been forged in fire and tempered by survival. The marks on her skin were no longer symbols of victimhood. They were proof that she had endured the impossible and emerged stronger. Whatever came next, she would face it as what she had always been, a survivor who refused to break, no matter what the world threw at her. General Harrison's soft utterance of a Black Ops survivor wasn't just recognition of what she had endured. It was acknowledgement of what she had become. And perhaps finally it was time to stop running from that truth.